just wanted to take a little time to introduce ourselves. My name is Matt Johnson, and I work for the IEP TA Center as a TA specialist. My background is a special educator, and hopefully that comes to light as we go through the we're looking at goals and writing skill-based goals today. I've been working for the Resource Center for, gosh, this is, I think, year 18 for me. So we've had a few different names over the course of that time. You might know us better as the IEP Resource Center. With our grant in grant last fall changed our name, changed a little bit. So, but we are pretty much the same people doing exactly the same things, going out to every districts around the state and working on different aspects of special education, either by direction or by request. So that's kind of where we're at. And let's see, a little more detail, I guess. Gosh, married, have 3 kids. One's in two in high school, 2 boys in high school. One older daughter is a freshman in college right now. So trying to navigate all those fun things. And it's been a lot of fun. I'm going to turn it over to Alana to introduce herself. And while she's doing that, if you guys wouldn't mind using the chat to introduce yourselves a little bit about yourself, where you're coming from, and maybe a little bit about what you'd like to hear from us today.
Great, thanks. Hi, I'm Alana Harveth. I've been here for 2 years at the IEP TA Center. I live in Hobart, Indiana. Does anybody else live in Northwest Indiana? You can put that in the chat. Matt is, so here it's 3 o'clock. For Matt, it's 4 o'clock because he's a little further away from me. So I'm in Central Time and he's in Eastern Time. I spent 18 years doing some co-teaching, teaching students with autism. And then I went out in like a coordinator role. So I was like a IEP facilitator after I got my admin license. And I am currently going to Indiana State University, getting my EDS completed because our job, we work for Indiana State, so you get tuition off. That's why Matt's daughter goes to Indiana State. I'm just kidding. I'm just joking.
Well,
But
you're not wrong.
that's not a bad perk, right?
Right.
So we just want to hear a bit about you. I went to IU for my undergrad, and Matt went to Purdue, so we always rival. So if you guys have any of that in common with us, you can put that in the chat as well. But we are excited to be with you guys today to talk about writing skill-based goals. And I see that you guys are putting a little bit about yourselves in the chat, which is fantastic.
Fantastic.
And if you don't have to write in the chat. We always say choice is a friend of inclusion. So if you're driving and just listening, that's great too. But we just want to get to know our audience. So thank you guys for that.
All right. First year special ed teachers. Nice. All right. A lot of first year teachers. Great. So that's a lot. So as we're getting into this today, I think one thing that's going to make it more powerful and meaningful for if you're able today, I know I can't really tell where everyone is in the moment, but if you have the opportunity, it's important to look at your own information. I think as we go through this, as we talk about the details of goal writing today, I think it's going to be more meaningful for you. We're going to have some examples to look at, but I think it's going to be much more meaningful, and you're going to take away more if you're looking at your own information. So take the time if you have the ability to open up an IEP, look at something you're working on now or getting ready to develop, and that's I think going to be more meaningful to you as we go through this short overview today. So we'll hopefully that'll come to light as we go through this today. And if you do have any questions, if you have anything that pops up, please don't hesitate to ask. It's probably more efficient to use the chat at this point, but if you have something that you really want to ask, you can unmute and we can address those things today too. So I want to make sure you get your questions answered as we go throughout our afternoon. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started here and jump right in. So when we start looking at the first things, this isn't entirely relevant to a virtual session, but please, feel free to, as you're listening, ask questions, share your information. We will honor our time limits today. We'll be done by a hard stop by 5:30. We do have an electronic evaluation form that I'll remind you of toward the end. We'll have a link to that as we get to it. And we also have a link to a Padlet that you'll be able to access all the materials yourselves here shortly. Right, 4:30. Sorry. So we always talk about ground rules. We always want to share our resources also. So this is, oops, this is the Padlet. I'm going to put that in the chat right now too. If I can type that all together without making too many errors. I'm going to give you a little time to look at that. If I got that right the first time, almost right. Only a slight misspelling. Let's try. Boom. I think that. No, I wanted everyone. Now it's sent it. There we go. I was trying to send that to waiting room for some reason. So that's our Padlet. So hopefully that is in the PowerPoint is inside the Padlet. So Nikki, it's if you open that up, it's one of the first sections you'll see. I did want to hit that. Actually, let me take a moment to jump out of the presentation and just show you the Padlet itself, so you can get an idea of what's going on there. And this is the Padlet. We have the presentation on the left, so the full presentation's there for you. You can look through that at need, and we have all the handout, all kinds of supporting materials are there for us. Books, videos, articles, and other additional resources are all there. So this is available to you right now, and it's going to stay there. So after today, you can feel free to share it. Feel free to come back and check on it. As we look at this, or sorry, as we develop more trainings around goals or next year's trainings around goals, we will update this and leave it in the same place though, so you can come back and keep seeing the information there as it develops over time, and hopefully it's a resource for you for a long time to come. So that's the big idea there. But you're welcome to look at that Padlet and check it out, and hopefully get some good information that you can rely on down the road also. Sorry, getting some weird things going on. All right. So one of the things that we want to start off with is just whenever we talk about goals, whenever we talk about really planning for students, one of the things we want to come back to always are our beliefs about our students. So believing that students can learn, and I'm going to consistently encourage them to succeed, is really a baseline belief point for us. So we want to think about that as we're developing plans for students, as we're starting to work with them, as we're developing IEPs and goals. What do we believe about how students learn? Because when we're challenged, when our outcomes or choices are challenged, we always fall back to what we believe. So it's really important to have a solid understanding of what your beliefs are around students. That's going to help you develop further and be consistent with your students over time as you start working with them in your classrooms. So I'm not going to ask everyone to share your beliefs. We do that sometimes in the face-to-face meetings, but definitely take a moment, take a couple beats here and think about what do you think about students? How do you think about how students learn, and what are they capable of, and what our expectations are? Because that's one of the pieces that is big with this. If we believe our students can learn and learn, and it's going to push them to higher expectations. It's going to change our perceptions so that we're more susceptible, or we're going to push them. We're going to push our students and put them in give them more opportunities to succeed.
Matt, can I jump in really quick first?
Absolutely.
So if we walk into your building, what is evidence is it that all students are able to get those high expectations? Or if there's resource rooms, are the general education teacher and special education teacher having those talks? Are the special education teachers going to PLCs? All students are able to exceed at those high expectations. So those are just some things that we think about when we're talking about our beliefs in maybe the whole day training that I just wanted to pull out. So everybody's different at their building, but those are just some shifts to think about your district and how you believe might be a little bit different in your team. But those are just some things that we like to focus on.
Absolutely. Well, so today we're going to take some time, look at progress monitoring a bit, talk about goal writing, of course, and we're going to look at some goals together, and we'll see where we get to with the progress monitoring in different forms there. But we've definitely throughout the day, throughout our time, want to make sure we're connecting to practice. So keep that in mind as we're going through this, to think about students you're working with right now or have worked with. Look at IEPs, if possible, have one with you that you can look into and check on the goals right now. Look at what you're doing and see how it connects with what we're about to do. So let's go ahead and jump in here. One of the pieces, and this is interesting for me too. A lot of folks that were, as I look through the introductions, there's a lot of folks coming from the general education classroom and our first year special ed teachers. But this is a big deal here, just thinking about the idea of shared responsibility. So it's not our students and your students, these are mine and yours, these are our students that we are working together. And you can see is that student is the center of what we're doing, bringing the families in, community, and our school personnel together to support that individual for the best possible outcomes for them. So, you know, we are all accountable for all of our students' outcomes. So we all have to put in our work for each of those students. So that's important to consider as we're working through. And we're going to have to lean on each other to get the job done. There's no way we can do this all by ourselves. So if we want the best outcomes for our students, then we have to all buy into what we're doing. So we are going to spend some time talking about the build up to goal development and looking at goal development as a process. You know, when I first started doing, I guess when I first got into special education, as we started writing goals, they were, it was more of an event. As we started developing the IEPs, we had all of our case conferences in a single day or two in a given year. And we spent a couple days ahead of time writing all these IEPs out. And the problem with that kind of thing is it gets to be kind of a assembly line approach. And there wasn't a lot of thought put into the goals, at least in my case. I can only really speak for myself, but I can also remember quite a few IEPs I read through at the time. So what we're going to talk about here, and the reason we talk about the way we do, is to make sure we're connected. This is IEP we're developing as a living document. It's not just something we're writing and leaving on a shelf. It should be connected to what we're doing with the students from day to day. And there's a process involved in developing this. So the idea is, if we start with progress monitoring, or we start with the data we've collected and we walk ourselves around this wheel, we're going to come to the goal. It's going to be there for us if we go through these things thoughtfully. And that's what we're going to try to do today. And we're going to start off with progress monitoring. And this is something that, you know, look into the chat and or I'm sorry, you can respond in the chat to these couple of questions.
One new notification from Amazon. US.
And so think about, what is progress monitoring and why does it matter? So in the chat box here in the next couple, 20, 30 seconds here, what is progress monitoring to you and why is it important? Why does it matter? So just take a minute or two, or not a minute, 30 seconds or so, sorry. And just, what are your thoughts around those things? Share that in the chat with us if you can. And if you want to unmute and share it that way, that'd be fantastic also.
Okay, I'm Leroy Posey. And progress monitoring to me is like, it helps you track how well the goal is progressing and whether or not you need to re-evaluate the goal or the goal's been met and need to revise the IEP. That's what progress monitoring means to me.
Perfect. Thank you. Yep, you see the growth, you see where a student is, do we need to revise a goal? All those are good things, and so it gives you that feedback you need in order to make those decisions. So that's an excellent point. And if you look at the definitions we have for things as far as the state goes, as far as Article 7 goes, it's a systematic procedure for frequent and repeated collection. So we're looking at collecting information to analyze the performance of the student, and that's really what it comes down to. And that's exactly what you were sharing in the chat and what we heard there as well. So just keep in mind, it's a systematic procedure. So there's a plan. It's frequent and repeated. So there's a couple things in this I wanted to point out, that it doesn't give you a number. So there's not a hard, fast, hey, this is how many times I must progress monitor, but it does say that we have to frequently collect and frequently and repeatedly collect information and analyze that. So that's something that not everybody gets when we talk about data collection, is we not only have to collect it, we have to analyze it. So once we get the information, what does it tell us to do? So that's important to keep that in mind. It's not enough just to collect it, but we do have to analyze it as well. So progress monitoring itself is a type of formative assessment. So it's an ongoing thing. It's a planned tool where we're just checking in to see where the student is in learning the skills we're trying to teach. So it's a plan, again, a planned response, and it's ongoing. So we want to see relatively frequently, check in to see how the student's going with that learning those skills. So just keep that in mind with formative assessment. So we're seeing how the student's developing, and are we on track to learn this skill. So progress monitoring does matter. The big thing, I think it's on the bottom of the slide, is the legal requirement. This is something that we must do. First of all, the why for progress monitoring comes down to it's a legal requirement. There's no option to ignore this. So it's something to keep in mind as you're looking through this. So it does help us determine, like I think a lot of comments mention this, determining the students making progress, helps us to change instruction, provides data. And if we don't complete it, it can actually considered a denial of FAPE. So that's something that's challenging sometimes, but it also helps us to illustrate that the student is benefiting educationally from the work we're providing. So we have our documentation that we're doing this work, here's how the student's progressing. So we can show that FAPE was provided by the documentation. So that's important that we keep track of that information, not just for the legal aspect of it, which is required, but to give us the feedback we need to show that what we're doing is making a difference. And if it's not changing for the student, then it gives us I guess an incentive to change our practice. That this isn't working for that student, so let's make an adjustment. Or this is effective, so let's continue. Or how do we make it more effective? Will all be questions that we'd ask as we review the data.
And FAPE is free appropriate public education. And just in case you don't know, because there's some new people and that jargon is sometimes hard in special education. So yeah, so if a parent possibly like sued a school and there is no progress monitoring done, you're going to lose, because there's FAPE means that there's no that means that no services were rendered, because you can't document that, even though there was that probably not true. But that just from a school district standpoint, I just know that. I just wanted to say what FAPE was. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a really important point. First of all, thanks for the jargon check. LEA is local education agency, by the way, which is just another fancy term for school. So it's one way for the school to demonstrate that a free and appropriate public education was provided. So I need to make sure I check myself on that, because we're going to talk about those a little bit later. So benefits of monitoring progress: it can accelerate learning. As we know what's effective for students, we can be more efficient in the things that we choose. It helps us to make database decisions. Documents progress, I think we talked about that a little bit. It helps us to clearly communicate the progress between our staff members and with the student and the family, and it equates to higher expectations. One of the things I mentioned a lot of times when we go to this slide is, it's great that just the fact that we progress monitor. There's research around just teachers progress monitoring has a great effect on our students' outcomes or their learning. If we also bring students into that discussion, it's even more powerful. So if we talk to students about the progress they're making, the goals we've set for them, and where they're going and where they've been, it's even more powerful for them and helps accelerate that learning even more than just monitoring the information and keeping it to ourselves. So if we bring the student in, it can be even more impactful. So it's something to consider. That's not always going to be possible, but it can be really powerful if you get the opportunity. So some common errors when we get into progress monitoring: if we don't implement our plan. So like Alana just said, if we don't do it, then we're going to have a problem. We don't have data, and there's no proof that we did the work that we said we did. If we don't delegate responsibilities, that's one thing to keep in mind with progress monitoring, is if we're working together here, it's not going to be just me collecting information. I'm going to work with my assistants. I'm going to work with a general education teacher, other folks that are in the classrooms and that work with our students. We can work together to pull data in, and hopefully that can improve that process. Measures are inappropriate. Sometimes we see things like we were just talking before the session today, where folks are counting number of removals from class, those kind of things, which is data, but it's not. It's more of an outcome. It's not going to really be monitoring the student's improvement in behavior, which is what we probably want to do. It's going to be measuring adults' response to the student's behavior. So if I kick a student out of class, it's how my response to what they're doing, not really helping that student improve their behavior. So even if we reduce the removals, it doesn't necessarily mean that students learning to do better. Monitoring is not frequent enough. Sometimes we get into this state where it's, well, we don't have a whole lot of time, but we need, as we're going through and collecting data. But keep in mind, when we're reporting information out to parents, we do have to report at least as often as peers receive their grades, typically. And when that doesn't, reporting and collection are two different things, though. So when I'm collecting information, you have to figure out how often is good enough for you personally. But think about, if we just do once per quarter, then that's all that goes on that report card when we send it home, that progress monitoring report. And for that first quarter of the year, which we're just about ending up on now, it only shows one data point there. So if we only collect one data point for a whole quarter, then it doesn't really illustrate growth for that student. Ideally, we're going to have more than 2 points per report, so we can see the growth and the change for an individual. Every district's a little bit different, and then, like I said, there's not really a state or federal mandate on how often we must progress monitor, but we need probably more than, we definitely need more than one per quarter. A lot of districts will go 2 per month, 1 per month, something like that. But you have to manage that. Maybe it's something you guys can share in the chat if you want to, like how often do you collect information? What frequency are you comfortable with? Because ultimately we have to do it once we've made the plan. Once we come together and say, write the IEP and say, here's how often we're going to collect data, that's what we have to do then. If we say once a month, then when we generate those reports, we should expect a data point once every month. So
and
that's
3
just
points on the our trend line, right, Matt? So
right.
like we need to have at least 3 points before we can see a trend. So if you don't do it, if you do it once every 9 weeks, it's going to be 27 weeks before you see a trend line.
Right.
So that is, I mean, and that's what happens sometimes. So yeah, so just thinking about
right.
that.
Well, and the thing is, most of the guidance is going to say more frequent is better, and you have to find a balance in there. But if we do like Alana just said, if we only do a data point every quarter, then that almost limits it slows us down if we want to make a change, because we're looking for the progress monitoring to give us data to tell us that our goals are either appropriate or not appropriate for the student, or not, our instruction is effective or not effective. And the sooner we know that, the better. So if we only collect data once a quarter, then really we're waiting a whole 9 weeks to make changes if we see something that's not appropriate. Or we might, if we're waiting for that trend line to show up, we're waiting 3/4 of a school year before we're saying this is not effective. So that's something to keep in mind as you're working with this process, is thinking about how agile do I need to be here with this individual? How much data do I need to collect so I can respond quickly and make a change when it's appropriate? Because we don't want to spend a quarter, excuse me, working on skills interventions that aren't effective for an individual. So that's just something to keep in mind, and a real important point. So if we have a few moments here, I see some folks are jumping in the chat here. Once a quarter, 1 to 2 times weekly, are all good. Those are some things just to keep in mind. But something if you want to share in the chat with us quickly here, how have you monitored? What kind of tools do you use locally to progress monitor, and do you feel like it's successful right now? So think about that for a second. What tools do you typically use? How successful do you feel like it has been for your school and for your students? I'll give you a minute. few seconds on that.
I had binders. I mean, I was old school. So that's just one way to do it. So I had binders with my students' names on the sides with their goals and then their progress monitoring. And I taught my paraprofessionals how to help me with the data because I needed them to help me. But if I didn't have it already written out and we knew the structure, it would be really hard for me to get to it because sometimes I had other things going on in my classroom. So that was just my own structure, but I'm sure other people use different things. We'd like to maybe share some knowledge of what you guys kind of use in your classrooms. Great, thanks.
Yeah, we had different charts. We have different behavior charts, and then we kept track of those kind of things, and just observations. We had those kind of different tools. I came around initially where we didn't have a whole lot of technology to start off, and then that got better as time went on. We were able to use more spreadsheets and those kind of things to keep track of the students' progress and take notes and those kind of things. When I first started, we weren't using computers to do any of that work. We didn't even have them then. So, but that got better pretty quickly. So those are, there are, and we do have some. I think that's fantastic if you can, yeah. Okay. And we're going to share a few resources, I think, here that might help you with some different ideas. There's some districts have their own tools, some formative assessment tools you can rely on. But looking ahead to as we're collecting information, as we're working, that's one of the ideas with this shared responsibility concept is as we write goals for students, you're not going to be the one spending most of the day with most of your students. So we have to think about, well, then who is, and can we use things that are going on in a general education class already to give me the information I need? So if I need a writing sample, I need a math sample or something like that, you can reach out for those kind of things. If you need some help with observations, you might be able to work with your classroom teachers to support that as well. So that's a little bit bigger ask there to go through. Yeah, DIBELS, lit, and comprehension tools, NWEA scores can be helpful. Those kind of things. So the things that I would be cautious about with NWEA, those sometimes can get you to drill down to specific skill deficits a student might have, but generally those are used for large groupings of students. So an NWEA score is made up of a lot of information. So there's a lot that goes into that score. So we consider that an outcome. So if you write a goal that says, I want to improve this score, well, my question would be, well, how do you plan to do that? What skill deficits does a student have that are keeping them from performing that outcome that you'd like to see? Same kind of things with grades. If we see the student's grades are below average, or maybe they're failing, but we want to improve the outcome, those grades for that student, what skills do we need to teach the students so that's possible? What are they missing, or what are they not doing that's keeping them from performing as their peers are? So that we're going to talk about that when we get into goals here shortly, but that's definitely something to keep in mind. So considerations, just to leave off with this before we get into the goal, the meat of the goals pieces, but big questions when you're at a case conference, when you're writing a goal, thinking about how will progress be measured, when will it be done, and who is going to do this? Because if one of those three things are missing, then you're going to really struggle with progress monitoring down the road. So you have to think about that, and we're going to talk about this when we start structuring the goals here shortly, that if we don't have a clue on how we're going to progress, or having that good idea of how progress is going to be measured, then we're going to struggle with that. Or when, during what class period and what location, those kind of things. We want to narrow it down, so we're not trying to track a student all day long. We want to focus our attention just on maybe a small window within a school day. And then we have to have a who. We have to have someone who's actually going to do it. So if we spread ourselves too thin, we're going to really struggle to progress monitor for our students. And just keep in mind, you want to plan that ahead of time. As you're going through, as you're developing a goal, think this through. How am I going to do this? What's the best time to capture this for this student? And who's going to capture this for this individual? So we want to have all those conversations with ourselves as we're developing the IEP and developing the goal, but we're at a meeting, we really want to have that final conversation so we're sure this is going to happen. So if we're talking about progress monitoring, we're going to touch on each one of these things. The next piece we're going to get into is measurable goals. If we're going to progress monitor, we're going to really struggle if our goals aren't measurable. So just keep that in mind. That's why we went through the data collection and progress monitoring first, just so we have a, I guess that sets the stage for what we're going to do with our measurable goals. But if we don't have a measurable goal or objectives, we're really struggling with progress monitoring. How do we measure this? If it's vague or incomplete, then we're really going to struggle with this concept. So we're going to talk about how to make right measurable goals. We're going to talk a little bit about some data collection decisions and analysis here as well, given time with today. But we're going to focus mainly on the next step, looking at measurable goals and objectives. So let's dive right in. So this should look familiar. This is the process that we kind of go through, but as we start developing this, and one of the reasons I talk about progress monitoring first is it is connected to goal development. So it collects our information, so it's our starting point. The information we collect for progress monitoring informs present levels that are coming, and that helps us to identify the standards we're going to select to align to our goals. And we'll also have a little conversation around accommodations and modifications, a little bit about specially designed instruction, and then lead us right into standards aligned goals. So that's the process we're going to go through here next. The first thing in that process that we're going to talk about are present levels. When we talk about present levels, one of the big things here we want to consider is that they're current and relevant. So present levels should be updated annually. I had that question actually with a group I was working with the other day, and they asked me if are we supposed to do that every year? Absolutely. Every time we hold a case conference, we're doing it for a reason. Some data has changed, so let's make sure that's included here. So it should be current information, should be updated annually at least. And then relevancy, I added this piece in here just to remind us that we have electronic systems that we use for collecting information and displaying the IEP. And all the past IEPs are recorded there as well. So we don't have to keep everything that's been recorded for the student for all time. If we have new information, we'll make sure that's recorded. But the old information, if it's no longer relevant, there's no need to keep it there. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we want to cut everything older than a year out. We want to keep the information that's going to help us program for the student. So if the older information is helping us to develop this IEP, then by all means keep it. If it's not relevant any longer, it's not helping me write new goals or develop a plan for the student, then there's no need to keep it any longer. We also want to think about skill-based here. If we're going to write skill-based goals, we have to have skill-based information here. We have to have some information around the student's current levels of performance, which is present levels of performance, makes sense. We also want to talk about learning deficits here. Where are we struggling? Where are our relative strengths and where are our challenges lie for this individual? So we're going to think about that as we're developing present levels. So one of the big things that I think about when I do the training around present levels, I do a workshop around this too. A good couple questions to keep in mind around present levels are to think about, what does this student need to learn, or what do they need to learn to do better? So what does this student need to learn this year? What do they need to learn to do better this year? So those are the two things you want to consider as you're developing your present levels, and that might help narrow down some things too. We want to make sure we consider academic and functional skills and needs within this process. So a lot of districts use templates to help you direct this. So you want to make sure if your district does use a template, then it's a nice resource to have, you can rely on to help you make sure you touch all the bases when you go through your discussion of present levels for a student. If they don't, it might be worth your time to make something up for yourself so you're consistent all the time. You don't want to forget an area for this, even if it's to say that the student's at the functioning appropriately or has grade level appropriate behaviors with a certain area or expectations, whatever it happens to be there. just make sure it's clear as you're going through that. I also share with folks, a lot of times we get feedback from our general education teachers around individual students. So in middle school, high school, students might be going to several teachers. And if all those teachers are saying the same things, it's okay to summarize things. So the parent doesn't have to hear 5 different ways of this way the student's behaving, or they're struggling to keep up with materials, those kind of things. After the first couple of instances or references in the discussion here, we get it. So just summarize that information so it's clear. But we do want to make sure we have some discussion around impact. So as that's another way to think about access to and progress in the curriculum. So given what our understanding about this characteristics of this student, what's the impact of that on their access to and progress in the curriculum? So if a student's struggling with reading, if they have a specific learning disability in reading, that's going to show up not just in English language arts classes, but every time the student's going to read. So every class they're going to be in, social studies, science, history, math, anytime they're going to read from a textbook or try to decipher language visually, there's going to be an impact there. So we need to consider that and make sure the student has appropriate supports in those places. So present levels are the baseline. They're the beginning of the rest of the IEP. This is the starting point, and the information we relate here, the needs we relate here, need to be addressed later in the IEP as well. So if we talk about behavior here, there should be some behavior supports built in. If we talk about academic, social needs, there should be some supports for those later on in the IEP. And as I read through present levels, as you read through present levels, it's your opportunity, look through and see if it matches up. The things that are related in the present levels, we should be able to reasonably predict what's going to happen in the rest of the IEP based on what we read in present levels. We may not be exactly matching there, but the things we mention here should be addressed later in that document as well.
And can I add just really quickly that to make sure that there's data in those present levels. So when you get some information maybe from the general education teachers, since there's a lot here and sometimes they don't maybe know, and they can put a student is nice in class. Well, that's great. But just the data on the specific skills is very helpful for the present levels.
Absolutely.
To get that information with the general education teachers.
Right.
So sometimes the general education teachers, it's hard. They don't know what to look for, how to present that information. So just going over that is helpful. That the data for the skills that we're going to need should be in those levels. Sorry, Matt.
No, you're fine. That's perfect. I think the thing to consider with that is a lot of times we see in present levels like the student really struggles with comprehension. Might be a statement that's which is a nice general statement of what the student's function, where the student is right now. But what you want to add to that is, how do you know? And what impact does that have? The student, basically the student has a hard time with comprehension, and know that based on this assessment, and here's how it impacts the student. So you want to make sure you explore that a little bit as you start laying it out there, because I have seen those present levels where it's just a list of student struggles in math, student has a hard time with this kind of problem. Like, okay, if the data is not there, then you're going to have a hard time completing the rest of the IEP if there's not good information here. A lot of times with new teachers, when you struggle writing goals, it's go back to present levels, look to the information that's there. And many times you're struggling with a goal because there's not good information in present levels to start. So the data's got to be there for us to base the rest of the IEP upon. So let me make sure we don't miss any questions.
Oh no, yeah, I was looking at that. I like to ask them if you guys wouldn't mind what this picture brings to you, like in the chat. So what do you think about this picture? Because we really like this, but what do you see when you see this picture in regards to education and the stairs and the so I'll let you guys talk about that. Matt, you can talk about it, but I like to ask what people think.
Yeah, as you look at this picture, what kind of things come to mind? And think in terms of education, because I was looking for some alternative to kind of the cartoon versions of what education can look like. And as I look at found this picture, what I like is you can go on the stairs all the way to the top, or you can take the ramp all the way to the top. So you either pathway takes you to the where we'd like to go. You can also access the stairs and the ramp at any time. As if you need that extra support, it's right there's handrails on the sides there, but you can also get off and on the ramp and onto the stairs whenever possible, so you can transition between one or the other. So support's there when you need it. And I think, and this is really a good analogy for things like MTSS and those kind of things too, making sure the supports are there. But it's really education in general. Let's give kids the supports they need when they need it, and let them tell us what they need as we're going through. And that's part of what progress monitoring is a look at that information. What's it telling us? Is what we're doing appropriate? Let's give them different supports, give them different accommodations to get the student where they need to be. Because we're all trying to get to, I like that, meeting the student where they are, different approaches, but they all lead to the same place. Those are really good. I appreciate that comments. Those are really nice. So that's really, and the reason I put this up here when we talk about grade level standards, is the key is alignment when you're starting to do this. So as you're writing your IEP, as you're developing your goal, you want to think about the connection to what we're talking about here and what's going on in the general education classroom. So we are asked to align to grade level standards. So if the student's in 5th grade, we should be picking a 5th grade, or if they're entering in the 6th grade, a 6th grade standard. But we really, I guess the requirement here is that we align to that standard. So the goal we're about to write is based on the student's instructional level or their instructional needs, their current needs. But it's typically a skill that is a building block toward that grade level standard. So a 6th grade standard I think about a lot is after we read an informational text, we summarize the information. So we might, for a student that's working on just maybe they're just working on phonics skills, we can write a goal given this sentence or these groups of words, the students will sound out, we're thinking along those lines. But those are building block, those are skills for the student to build towards summarizing. They have to learn how to read first before they can access that summary. Or it might be, instead of summarizing, these students, we're going to expect them to underline the main idea or circle adjectives within this. Whatever it is, we're doing something building toward the outcome of the grade level expectations. So that's the connection there. Yep. It's those access skills, those access points. So these are the things we're working on to hopefully build toward that grade level outcome. So that's the grade level standard. And the secret here too is you just do the best you can here. The grade level standard is kind of the requirement, but there's no one's going to tell you that you can't pick that standard, but have those conversations and what makes sense. And sometimes that's the feedback we can get from our general education teachers and staff members, like what standards are going to be really at risk for this individual and what really matters for them. What do you really think we need to focus on? So we can work on that together as part of that shared responsibility. All right. So briefly, I want to talk about accommodations, because again, these are based on the needs that we've expressed in present levels. So we've talked about where the student is, what the barriers to learning happen to be, what the needs exist for them as we go through that. And accommodations are one of the ways we can respond to that need. Now, if they're the only way that we respond, if all the student needs is accommodations to function in the classroom, then IEP is not maybe not the appropriate method for that. A 504 plan might be more appropriate. But accommodations are supporting for a skill different than what we are assessing. So if in this case, if for students reading, her glasses are her accommodation in this case. So I'm not measuring her eyesight, I'm measuring her reading skill or fluency in this case. So I want to give you the tool that you need to do that. So that's one way to think about it. Accommodations, again, meet a need so without this accommodation, the student would not be able to perform this task. All we're trying to do is level the playing field for these individuals, for these students, not to give them an academic or competitive advantage, but give them an equal opportunity. give them a chance to access the content, give them a chance to make progress in the classroom. We're not trying to make it easy. We're not trying to make it so, you know, and give them an advantage over their peers, because they're already at a disadvantage because of their disability. We're just trying to level the playing field. We also have the same expectations when we have accommodations in place. We're still expecting the student to perform in this, or at least access, that's not the right term. We're still expecting the same thing from these students as their peers. So the accommodations are just a method for us to give them an opportunity to do that. We still have the same assessments, same outcomes are coming from that work. Make sure
I asked some questions in the chat.
okay. So modifications are a little bit different in that now we're asking support for the skill that we're assessing. So in this case, if we might be given in this, you know, the example we have here for an eye exam, give a person glasses, it's going to give them an opportunity to read that, where if I took the glasses off, they might not be able to. So, but we're in that case, we might be giving them an eye exam and then give them the glasses. That's a modification that their eyesight's so poor they need some way to access those pieces. So modifications are changing expectations. They are a different something curricular change that is necessary for the student just to access or to participate with the content, really. So one of the big questions when we talk about modifications are the differences between a modified curriculum and modifying an individual assignment. So that's, you know, modifying individual assignments or activities might not be that big a deal to occasionally do for any student. But when we start modifying curriculums, then we get into the alternate assessment and the content connectors, and then we have a different expectation for the students, where the outcomes are different. We're looking at a different assessment fully. So that's really what a modification is. Even if they're students in the same classroom as their peers, they may even get the same instruction as their peers, but we're not asking them to do the same thing with that work. We might be giving you a simpler task to do, or working on a slightly easier task for them to complete. So that's where modifications, but they're not a barrier to general education and inclusion, but they are something a little bit different, and that can be a little challenging sometimes. So when we start thinking about things like, let's say, spelling lists, those kind of pieces for students, a lot of times we get in the conversation accommodations, modifications, where it's reducing the number, like reducing homework, or we're reducing the number on a spelling list. And so a couple things you need to consider when you're looking through those kinds of things. Like a spelling list, for example, if you are just saying do only 5 words or something like that, or half the words that their peers are doing, then that can be considered a modification. The exception, it could, on the other, it can be considered a modification if we're just doing like the first 5 or 10 words, and we're not exposing the student or assessing the student on all the skills that are represented in that list. Same kind of thing on like a math assignment. If there's like 20 problems, if we just say, hey, do the first 5, the student's really not going to practice all the skills that are represented in those 20 questions. A lot of times we have, you know, different groups there. So a lot of times we want to ask folks to, you know, if it's a skill, different skills are being assessed, different types of spelling words are being assessed. Let's choose a few from each group that are being assessed, or same thing for math problems, that if it's going to be an accommodation, then we still want the student to be practicing this different skills that are represented on that assignment. We may not have as many to do, but we're still practicing that particular skill within those assignments. So we're not, so that might be the difference.
Yeah, so if there's 20 addition problems, if the student only has to do 5 of them, that's not changing the complexity. That's just giving them less, because hopefully that's the same thing. If it's like multiplication, division, subtraction, and all of those things, and the students are only expected to do the addition because those are the easiest, and the other skills are on that worksheet, they're not expected, that's a modification. So that's how it kind of accommodations and modifications are kind of that's how they differ a little. And there's a lot of questions in the chat, which are great questions, which we always have when the short
Right.
with the short time. I know.
Yep. And I think Leslie asked about the multiple choice spelling tests, and this is my opinion, but I feel that we're changing what we're testing there. It's a little bit different expectation in that case. I would feel that would be a modification. I don't know, Alana, what do you think about that?
Or it's differentiation, depending on, I guess, on how we see it. Like I think there's certain ways you could see it as differentiation versus modification or accommodation, because if it's the same, like we always have to look at the standard and what the flexible, what the fixed verb is in there. If it's fixed or flexible, what the students have to cover,
Right.
they're still able to show you the standard in a different way, then that could be an accommodation. But if you're changing the level of the complexity of the standard, then that is when it's a modification. And we could,
Right.
of course, go, I feel like, back and forth a lot with some of
Yeah.
these are very similar. And it's always case by case basis, which we can.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, and I think the thing to consider on either one of these either modifications or accommodations, think about what's being assessed in that process. And Alana really mentioned a really important point. When you look at standards, like the one I mentioned earlier, where the students are after reading a text, ask you to summarize that. We assume it's going to be writing, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. There's some wiggle room within that. So how do I want the student to summarize? Can they do it verbally? Can they do it different, thinking about different methods we can use to summarize what we've just read. If the student's nonverbal, what are they going to do? So those kind of things we have to consider as we look at those pieces. But think about what's being assessed. What are we trying to measure within this piece? And if it doesn't affect the measure, we can give them accommodations. But if we modify what we're measuring, then or change what we're measuring somehow, then that could be considered a modification. But like we can debate, we can probably find 100 different debate points within those processes. But it's just think about what's being measured and how we intend to assess that student for that particular skill. So I'm going to move on. I know that we can talk a lot about those pieces, but I wanted to talk about specially designed instruction real quickly. Specially designed instruction is about adults basically given the unique needs of a student and that result from the disability. What are we planning to do about those needs? So I think that's really what specially designed instruction comes down to, is given the needs that we've expressed in present levels, what are we planning to do about those things? What kind of instruction is a student require to make progress, to ensure access to and progress in the general education curriculum, if at all possible? So really comes down to 3 areas: content, methodology, delivery. And the content is really about what students are learning. So what Alana mentioned this earlier, we can often meet standards in different ways. We can learn different things, different methods to get to the same end. So that's really something to consider when we look at content. We can adjust content to fit the student's need and instruct them along those lines, instead of, if the main content's not going to be functioning for that student, we can adjust those things. The methodology, how students are being taught. So we have to, that's one thing we can do for specially designed instruction, is look at strategies, interventions, and techniques, and specific methods that are more effective for students with disabilities. So this is, I think, the most common option is looking at different ways we teach students and different interventions and strategies we use to support those individuals. So that our specially designed instruction can be part of that piece. And delivery of instruction is the third piece, like when and where are students taught, the context of the instruction, the location, group size, and dosage. Thinking about how much time we spend with the student pre-teaching the skills or reteaching skills. Those are all specially designed instruction. So, and we do a whole day, we have a whole presentation around specially designed instruction. So if anyone's really interested in that, we're more than welcome, or more than willing to share materials and invite you to attend one of those. Those are really good. That's a really good day spent talking about specially designed instruction. But when we talk about specially designed instruction, as we start developing, we still have a shared responsibility here that I might not be able to deliver this all the time. So as a special education teacher, I can rely on others to support me in this, but it does take a lot of collaboration and effort to make it possible. So if general education teachers can provide specially designed instruction, but keep in mind, special education and specially designed instruction are additional, they're additive pieces. So the general education teachers have their core information they're going to present. Specially designed instruction is additional. This student might need more time and more prompting and more supports to access and make progress with that information. So when we talk about specially designed instruction, we can't simply say, oh, the general education teacher is going to provide that. Well, they may be able to with our support, but keep in mind it's additional to what's already being taught to that in that classroom. So specially designed instruction is special, it's unique, it's based on the student's goals and can be progress monitored, and it's additional to what's being already taught. So there's a lot of things going on. Yeah, well, we can share a link to that with everybody here, I think, toward the end of our time to the SDI piece. Let's go ahead and dive into goals, though. I know we're getting, time is of the essence here. As we're talking about writing measurable goals and objectives, one of the big pieces that comes up is when we look into Article 7, there's not, and in our federal law too, it just says we have to write measurable goals and we have to measure them. So if we don't have measurable goals, then that can be a denial of a free and appropriate public education, just like the same thing if we don't progress monitor those goals. So it doesn't give us much instruction on how to write measurable goals, though. So we have worked with a lot of folks to come up with this simple equation here, and we're going to go through each aspect of it here together. So the first piece, we're going to look at target skills. What do we want the student to learn? The stimulus material or conditions, like under what environment and location and requirements that we're going to produce this or demonstrate this skill. And then criterion for acceptable performance is how are we going to know when we're finished? How do we know when we're done? How do we know when this is complete for the student? So if all those things are in place, then we should have a measurable goal when all things are said and done. Now, more of you are probably familiar with SMART goals. One of the things you don't see in this sequence is that time component. And just keep in mind that we are writing annual goals. So that time component might not be necessary. If it makes you comfortable to say by the end of the IEP or by the next annual case review, the student will, that's absolutely fine. Doesn't hurt anybody's feelings, but it doesn't make the goal more or less measurable. But these three components are key. So we're going to focus on those as we go into the next step. So as we talk about target skills, we want to think about how is the student going to show us what they know? How are they going to demonstrate the learning and what they understand or can do by the end of that IEP? So a couple things here. Keep in mind, end of the IEP. So we have a whole year to work on this particular skill. So it's going to be a big one that we're going to be working on. It's going to take a lot of intense effort to move the student to this target skill for us. So we have to think about that keep that in mind. When we start developing the targets and we start developing goals, keep in mind also that we don't have to write a goal for everything we're going to do all year long. Just set the end target, knowing that as I deliver instruction across the course of the year, that's what we're building toward, this target skill we're trying to get to. So that's something to think about. When we are trying to measure a goal or write something that's measurable or develop a target skill, one of the core things to consider is that it's only measurable if we can see or hear it. And we want to, if we look at feelings or thoughts, those are things we really can't measure. We have to look at the outward evidence of those feelings and thoughts. So when you look in the column on the left here, words that will prevent goals from becoming measurable are these. And I was just reading a goal together with a teacher earlier today, and they were using the word identify there in the middle. And I think that's a pretty common thing. I won't ask folks to confess there, but I can honestly say that I've done that. But it's something that as you're thinking about, how do you plan for the student to identify that? Is it underline, write, say, point to, by the end of this IEP, where do you want to be? So that's
And that's
something.
when you talk to them about the beginning, like about having their own access to their IEPs. So if you see these words on the left in your own goals, this would be a good place to try to change that for the next
Yeah.
time. Don't do them all now. Don't revise IEPs now or your goals, but on your next meeting, I always say, you do better when you know better.
Right.
After this, after we talk about this, and maybe you can look at those and see if you have those words and how you can make them more measurable. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. And make a note to yourself. Here's something I want to check into. Here's some adjustments that need to be made. And what's going to be helpful is to think about the student you're working with and what's it look like when they do this? What's it look like when they demonstrate their understanding? What's it look like when they identify the main idea, identify letters or colors or numbers or add or subtract, whatever it happens to be? What's it look like? And that's where you want to, that's what you want to capture in this piece. So we want behavior to be clearly observed, some things we can see happen. So not an outcome, not wishful thinking, but what are we seeing happen for this student, the skill that's changing for this individual, or that they're learning from us. So that's the target skill. So what do we want the student to know, understand, or be able to do by the end of the IEP? The stimulus material or condition is where and under what conditions is the student expected to perform the behavior or skill. So this is kind of a little bit dipping into that scientific method, and then we're trying to set this experiment up. So here's the skill we want to see, and here's the environment we want to see it in. So if it's in the general education classroom, after they've read a third grade level reading passage, or given this kind of word problems, or you can get the idea here. Given any one of these things, what do I expect the student to do? So you can think about, given a graphic organizer, given a text-to-speech device, or given, a word prediction software, the student will. So you think through those things as accommodations can find their way into this given piece, so that here's what the student has here when they perform this skill. So if I'm going to ask you to answer some comprehension questions after you read something, then I can have some things where after the students listen to a text or listen to a passage, here's what I want you to do. So I can do some different things with that. I just want to make sure it's really clear here. And you also want to be thoughtful about the location when you develop these IEP goals. We're going to see a couple examples of this here shortly, but where do we expect the student to perform this particular piece? You can't follow the student around every day, all day. So if we write goals that start off with things like, during all transitions throughout the school day, the student will, then all transitions throughout a school day requires you to watch all transitions throughout the school day. So we have to be careful about how, during observed transitions, or during passing periods from this class to this class, or when the student comes off of the bus, or goes to the bus, or comes from recess, whatever the framework happens to be, or in this classroom, or in a small, you can be specific enough so you don't want to drive yourself crazy there, but you also don't want to follow the student around all day, tracking all their interactions with their peers or all their conversations. So narrow it down to when you're going to see the student. When do I see this student? So that goes back to that progress monitoring discussion about the who's going to see it. Is anyone going to be there in this situation to see the student's behavior or to document their learning in another way? So we have to think about that when we develop the goal, and this is where that really happens. So the last piece of this is the criterion for acceptable performance. So how will we know when the goal is achieved? How do we know when we're done? And we want to think in terms of accuracy. So we can think of percentage accuracy. So the student will answer this type of question at 65% of the time correctly, 65% of observed occurrences, or however you want to phrase that. The quantity is how many, maybe it's how many steps the student can take unassisted, or how many times a student can do this action without prompting. Frequency is how often they're capable of doing this, and the duration is be how long is this activity, how long is the student engaged in this activity. Latency is just how long does it take for a student to initiate a task after they've received instruction. That one's one of those pieces we look at a lot for. I have goals around students will be more compliant, or students will work on assignments during class time, those kind of things. Latency might be what you want to go to, and those kind of things. Given as teacher's instruction, the student will initiate the task with fewer than two response in 4 or 5 observed instances. Something like that can be real helpful. And then fluency rate is just counting how fast the student's able to do something, which may or may not be a great measure of the student's ability, but speed sometimes is important. So that's up to you to decide where you'd like to go with that one. So let's take a little chance here, and we've got some time. We're going to look at a few goals, and I'm going to kind of walk you through the first one or two, and then turn you loose on one here. What we're looking for in these goals, and we're going to look at the first one by the next ACR, that one. And we're looking for, is it a measurable goal? Is it skill-based? So based on what we've just talked about, do we see those components? Do we see a given? Do we see a skill? And do we see a criterion for acceptable performance? And when we look through this particular one, we kind of see those pieces when given a second order polynomial with leading coefficient and so on is part of the given here. But there's also a part, it's kind of mixed up because it mentions, so whoops, when I look at this particular one, there's a couple problems that arise. So it gives me some information, so the structure's kind of there, but you can see there's a list of skills there. So the student will use a problem-solving checklist to correctly solve for factored form, identify zeros, graphics function, and so on. So the issue we have with this one is there's too many things listed. So when you have a list of skills, it's hard to measure those things. Even though it's technically skill-based, it's not very measurable because there's multiple skills listed in this particular goal. So usually when I see goals like this, I ask folks to look at that last skill that's listed and use that more often than not, that last skill that's listed is the most complex skill that the student's going to learn. So when you find yourself listing things, realize that the student's going to have to learn all those things to get to this last piece. So it's okay to, by the end of the IEP, here's where we're going to be. I'm going to teach, there's a lot of teaching and learning that's going to happen, but this is where we'd like to be. Now, there's a couple other issues with this particular goal. One being that this skill is really something that's not taught all year long in a math classroom. So, that's one thing that I would put this goal in here intentionally to remind folks to, look at the underlying cause. What's the root cause of the student's problems with this particular activity? Does it have anything to do with math? It could be with reading, could be with organization, could be some other things going on with that student. But it might not be this math skill that there's where the deficit lies. It could be more some other areas like executive functioning, those pieces we can look into. So what's the root cause of this problem? This is a really good, most of these goals do a good job of identifying a problem the student has. And that's not enough for us, though. We've identified the student has a problem with this kind of math skill, but most kids don't have a math disability in second order polynomials. There's something else going on. So we need to look at that. Maybe that's what we write the goal instead. Maybe it's problem solving strategies or organizational tools or teaching the student how to initiate tasks, those kind of things. Maybe that's the problem. It's hard to say. So there's a lot going on. So this goal by itself is not really measurable because there's too much going on within it. And likewise, the next one, if you read through that one, so by the end of the IEP, the student will demonstrate executive functioning skills in order to advocate for himself and complete work in a timely manner with minimal prompting 80% of the time. So when you look at that, what kind of things jump out at you as problematic? This is not a good goal. So what things do we just learned about a few of those, or just saw a few of these things? What things jump out as issues? You can share with us in the chat or unmute if you have some comments there.
Yep. What does timely manner mean?
Right.
Yeah, things like that. What kind of things are not measurable,
Right.
or how do you maybe prove them? Or
Yeah, look at minimal prompting. Which one, what's that? Yeah,
And one thing is improve social skills. How you going to measure that?
right. Yeah, there's a lot that's going on with this particular goal. And I should mention these are actual IEP goals I pulled from I scrubbed them clean a little bit, so hopefully you don't recognize anything of your own here, but these are goals I pulled from the actual IEPs that we worked with. And you get the general idea of what they're trying to do in this goal, but like you all pointed out, I don't know how to measure some of these things. Complete things in a timely manner, minimal prompting, executive functioning, social skill. How do I measure those kind of things? So that so they've identified probably that there's an issue with executive functioning for the student that they believe is causing them to struggle to turn work in on time. So we get that, but that really doesn't, we don't really get that out of the goal. This one's really tough to figure out what we're supposed to do in this particular piece. So, so if we're looking at executive functioning, it may be that, are we looking at initiating tasks? Are we looking at completing and finishing work? We're looking at, there's lots of different aspects of executive functioning that, yeah. And we don't really get to the skill it's being taught, do we? That's one of the pieces that, when we get into homework completion goals, again, that identifies there's a problem with homework completion, but what's the problem? What's the root cause of that issue with that student? What's behind it? And we have to ask ourselves why aren't they completing the work? What's getting in the way for that student? How do I help them move through it or move around it? And what do they need to learn from me to do so?
as an English major, I used to be kind of wordy with goals, and like this one says, in order to advocate for himself, like you're kind of putting descriptors in there, and you don't need that. So Matt always
Right.
talks about making sure it's very clear cut and concise. And if somebody else gets your IEP and they can read that goal, they should be able to tell you how they're going to measure it, what it looks like, without you having to explain it.
Yeah.
So that's like the main, like the test that we like to talk about.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, it commonly we call that the stranger test, but really just keep in mind that you're not dealing with, most of the time, not dealing with strangers here. As you're writing your IEP goals and developing them, you're writing them to parents too. They need to understand what's going on. So as we, and I know it's not on the page here, but it's something to consider as you're working with, I know we have a lot of new folks writing IEPs, think about the students and parents' needs also as far as their processing abilities and reading skills as well. So can we help them? How can we help, or sorry, how can we be more clear in this to help them understand what's going on? And especially if we're working with older students, they're going to be the ones making decisions eventually. Are we enabling them to enter into that process as well? So those are just a few sample goals, and I did add a couple. And I guess let's do this before we turn it over to everybody. But as we look at this last one, I guess we can pick. Well, let's do the one at the top of the page. If you want to look at this one, and anything else jump out at you when you look at this particular goal, it's pretty close to where we want it to be, but there's some issues with that. What thing? There we go. Some response there. I really appreciate when you guys are jumping in for us. It helps us to, yeah, 7 out of 10, 80%. That's can be a little confusing. We didn't have our magic word demonstrate show up again. So we have that. So one of the things with this particular goal that we can do, it says when given a literary text, one thing you might want to do when you see that kind of thing is define the grade level there, and think about that a little bit. So what grade level of the text, not just any text, but something there. Yep, exactly. On the great minds there. That student will demonstrate his ability to use context. So we can take out that whole phrase where it says student demonstrate his ability to, we can just say student will use context to determine the meaning of unknown words. So that's and like I think was commented there, the last part of that's a little problematic where it says 7 of 10 opportunities with 80% accuracy. We are not really sure how those things work together. So, maybe we want to flip that around. We can, we want the student to use context to determine the meaning of unknown words 80% of the time. Well, in 7 of 10 opportunities, that gets confusing too. So a lot of folks feel like the percentages make a goal measurable, and that's not necessary all the time. So in this case, you may just want to say student will use context to determine the meaning of unknown words in 7 of 10 opportunities. That's it. So you don't have to put a percentage in to make the goal measurable. But if you do use percentages, they need to make sense. They need to be connected to the information we've already shared in the IEP, so it's no surprise where we're getting those numbers from. So that's kind of hopefully that was helpful, just to go through some goals that are someone else's, because you need to use that critical eye when you receive goals from maybe a move-in conference, or you have IEPs rise up within your district or within your school that you've received this year. Take a look at those things and make some notes about what's clear, what's unclear. So if you're looking at things now, that's a good thing to take a note of. I don't understand what this means, or I'm not sure how to measure these pieces, or these are maybe there's some contradictions within the goals. Sometimes you see that. So those are things to make a note of. So as you come around again, like Alana mentioned, as you come around for annual case reviews, as you're revising IEPs down the road for the school year, make those adjustments. Let's make a better IEP here. Let's make better goals so we can hopefully are better able to measure that progress. So I did want to share, we're going to do something else. There's some good examples of goals in here too. So we talked about some things, some poor examples, but I do have a few good, hopefully some examples that'll help you get a start as you're trying to find the right language, or trying to find the right, structure for the goal. So here's a few ideas there. I tend to structure goals a certain way. Is like I start off with the given, or that criteria, or sorry, excuse me, the given piece, then the skill, and then the criterion. It doesn't have to be in that order. It's really what makes sense to you. So if it's written in a different order, it doesn't really matter, as long as all those components that we talked about are there. So the target, skill, the criterion, and the stimulus they're all there. And well, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Well, let me do this. We're going to do something a little different here, because we've looked at plenty of goals. We don't have a whole lot of time here. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and move back to just our general group and ask the question, does anyone have goals you're looking at right now that you're just struggling with? And we have a little time here. Any questions about specific, if you're going to share the goal, like put it in the chat or something, I'd ask you to take the student's name out of that, but spend a little time here and see if you have any additional questions or things we didn't touch on. We have some time to kind of catch up with those things.
And Matt, I like those. We kind of put those goals up there because it doesn't have a percent. Actually, it says like 17 out of 20, which still is measurable. Sometimes the philosophy is that it's not measurable unless it has an actual percent in there, but it is a percent written in a different way. So we wanted to have those examples for you so that you can see how it looks differently.
Well, and go ahead. I'm sorry, Danielle, do you have a question?
Yeah. So I actually do have a question. So I write a lot of behavioral goals. And as my first year, my classroom is a little bit kind of a different setup. So I actually am running a classroom that potentially can have kindergarten, pre-K all the way up to 9th or 8th graders.
Wow.
Who are on reduced days.
Okay.
So a lot of them come to me to do both academic and work on social emotional, their behavioral goals. And so I have to write a lot of those.
Okay.
We work a lot with the 5-point scale also. And so when incorporating those into the goals, what is some advice that you would have for me, just as so they're not repeating as, you know, the same. I mean, I know the goals are going to be different for each kid as every kid's different,
Yeah.
but instead of just, you know, it being about emotions or, you know, basing it around the 5-point scale. And
Well, I think, like you said, well, one of the things that if we're working on behavior, one of the things I always ask folks to go back to is looking at what got you there, the information you have so far. You know, the things that come to mind in it, or when we look at the behavior intervention plan, when we look at the functional behavior assessments we have, you know, we know what the triggers are for that student. So one of the things we can work toward and setting, because sometimes I don't, without looking at an example, it's kind of hard kind of doing this on the fly a little bit, but a lot of times I ask folks to look at those trigger examples we have, because, you know, given this trigger, that this instant thing that might trigger this individual, how do we want them to respond? So that's working on that positive aspect, is like, given, you know, this small group environment, here's how we want the student to respond to that. Or given, you know, if someone tells you no, here's the appropriate response. So we're trying, you know, looking at those for that, and this can get, so that gets you to some pretty individualized attention right there. And so, because eventually what we like to get to is, given all these triggers a student has, we'd like them to you know, incorporate one of these calming strategies or these other alternative responses. And that we might not be there right now. You know, it may be just being able to identify that student, being able to name the emotion they're feeling when this happens, so that they can, you know, it's up, I don't know where they would be on the developmental stage there. So the early childhood, really young kids, they might just need to be able to understand that when you do that, I get angry, or I'm sad because, or I'm upset when, you know, something happens, so that they know, start identifying those kind of pieces. And then, or at least maybe, and they may not be able to identify it in themselves either. But, you know, with little kids, it's more, let's look at pictures or look at videos of other people doing, so they can identify that person's angry. You know, what's some things that make people angry? What things that make you angry, and or sad? You know, I don't know. I'm getting into a whole behavior lesson there. Sorry, but you know, looking at those things like that, because, you know, when we look at different, we have to make a distinction sometimes between, like, if we're using different scales, behavior measurement tools within our classroom. So that's something that's in our classroom there. That is, you know, improving their score on a behavior scale is kind of the same as a test score, because we're looking at the, you know, how do we want, you know, it's an outcome. You know, we'd like this to happen, like to have a better response, a better score behaviorally in our classroom, but what are we doing to make that happen? You know, what instructional pieces are we putting in place? What teaching and learning has to happen that make that better? You know, so we do want that to improve, and we are going to keep track of those things, but we have to look at the root cause of, well, why aren't they right now? What's
And I
getting
was
in
going
the,
to ask you about that root cause chart that we have, and maybe
oh yeah,
the whole
perfect.
group would think that that would be a good resource. You know exactly where that is on our Padlet. So we have a
It's,
root cause chart that it breaks it down very, very specifically. So it'll talk about reading, and then all of this. And I guess we could show, maybe Matt could show you if you find it. Do you know where that is? Or
I
I
do.
think it's helpful to write goals around, for maybe the whole group to have another resource. I don't know, maybe not, but I just thought
It
that
is. That's a great resource.
was a good
And
resource
I'm trying to think
for
of
them.
where I'm looking at it right now. I'm looking for it right now.
Is it an SDI tablet, or is
I
it,
think it might be.
um, does anybody else have any, I know these are like specific questions to people, but
Yeah. So one of the things what Alana's referring to is, we can try to get that out to everybody, is I think Margaret Searle did this, and it just, she looks at like general issues, and has a whole broken down list of possible root causes of those things. So she looks at academics, looks at behavior, looks at social skills, that kind of thing. And so that can be really helpful, just give you that clue,
cool.
where do I need to start with this goal? Or you're gonna read through them with a specific student in mind and go, oh, that's it. That's the one. That's where we're at.
I
And
think it's a really powerful tool that I think everybody.
I thought it was in their Padlet too. I'll tell you what we'll do. I'll make sure it gets added to the Padlet, That way we don't have to track everybody's email down to figure it out there. We'll add that in. So hopefully today you'll have that later to get
Okay,
access to
and you
that.
said it's called the root cause chart?
Yeah, it's a root cause, and I want to look and see if I can find where that is.
When you guys were talking, that just came to my mind because I think it's
Yep,
really
that's
helpful.
perfect. Boy, I thought that was in this one too. Well, we'll get it to you. I won't kind of spend my time looking through Padlets here this afternoon, but
Yeah,
if
that's fine.
but I appreciate, Dan, hopefully that helps a little bit. And you know, that could be super challenging when you're trying to write. And the thing too, when you have a self-contained environment, you have a tendency to write goals around the curriculum that you're presenting. So just keep that in mind too, because you're going to have a curriculum that you do that everybody kind of gets, or every grade level kind of gets in your setting. And specially designed instruction, the goals are about the extra parts that the student receives. So what additional support the student gets from you because of their disability. So that can, I don't know if that's helpful all the time. Sometimes
Mhm.
it feels like a lot more work, but
Yeah,
but
that's the that's the comes along with the job.
the nature of it. Yeah. Oh, I know. So
Okay, thank you.
hey, no problem. Thanks for your question. I really appreciate that. So we are kind of getting toward the end of our time, and I did put in the chat a link to, and I'll bring it up. I guess I'll share my screen again so you can see the link from the presentation also. If I can get that to work for me, and there'll be just a little QR code to get to the evaluation form is really all I'm trying to get to, and I'll have that up here in a second. Oh, come on.
If you can email us, or if you have
Yeah.
specific questions, and we can try to get back to you if we don't know the answers. Matt was kind of the one talking today, and I was facilitating the chat. We were kind of co-teaching a little bit. I was adding my 2 cents a little bit.
So we don't like to stay in this mode where it's the one teach, one support. Not ideal. We try not to stay in that piece. And but that was with, oops, I did the wrong thing. Pushed the wrong button there. So that's the link to our there we go. Link to the evaluation, link to our website there. So you can scan that piece. It's in the presentation, that Padlet that we've got. Do appreciate you all being here today with us. And don't forget to do the evaluation. If, like Alana said, if you have questions, here's our contact information. Feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to help you out with individual questions. I know today is not the best place to share student specific information, but we can, in a more private setting, we'd be happy to help you go through whatever you need. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and we'd be happy to help any way we can.